Hi, I'm Jennifer Coffey, and I am the program lead for the State Personnel Development Grants, also known as the SPDIG, out of the Office of Special Education Programs. And welcome. I'm so glad that you are able to watch this informational webinar. This is specifically for the SPDIG competition for fiscal year 2023. Just a couple of notes regarding this webinar. This is for guidance only. So we do have a peer review process. This means that I am not involved in any of the decision making about the grant applications or the scoring of them, I should say. But I have been with this program for a while. I have seen successful applications and what's included in them. I have been part of grant panels before, and so I'm just giving you the best advice from lessons learned over the years often. I'm also going to be providing some of the most critical information from the Notice Inviting Applications, also known as the NIA. Please do review the webinar, Applying for Office of Special Education Programs Discretionary Grants, because that provides you some good information about submitting an application, which is its very own set of activities, processes. And then also we have a new video that describes OSEP and the programs that we support in OSEP that may support your work. So consider our technical assistance providers. I'm just going to give you an example of a couple. There's the Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports Technical Assistance Center, National Center on Intensive Interventions, National Center on Improving Literacy, National Center on Education Outcomes. And then there's CEDAR, which is always challenging for me to remember what the acronym stands for, but I know their work is great. They work with states thinking about the pipeline of teachers from the certification and standards for people being prepared all the way through being supported once they are in their positions. So many technical assistance centers, many resources from them, or they can actually provide technical assistance help. So please do take a look at our T&D and other programs via the video. So today we are going to talk about the purpose of the SPDIG program, which is probably the most important reason for us to come together for this informational webinar. And then I'm going to give you those tips I was talking about to develop your plan. I'm going to talk through the two absolute priorities and the competitive preference priority for this year, and a little bit about definitions. I'm just pulling out a couple of them. I'm not going to cover all of them that you will see in the notice and in the application package. I'm going to talk about the required contracts for this competition. Also, the Government Performance Results Act, so GPRA measures, we call them. And these are required measures that every SPDIG grantee must collect those data, must analyze them, must provide those data to us in the annual performance report. And then some general requirements and the selection criteria. And then I have a final tip for you before we close out today. So, as I said, most important reason why we're here is to talk about the purpose of the SPDIG grant. It is always to improve results for children with disabilities. That is, if there's one thing you remember from our time together, the requirement is to improve results for children with disabilities. It doesn't mean other children can't benefit from it, and other personnel who maybe don't work for the majority of their time with children with disabilities, but the key reason to do this work is to improve results for children with disabilities. And that needs to be clear and evident in your application. So the overall is the purpose of the program is authorized by IDEA, and it's to assist state educational agencies in reforming and improving their systems for personnel preparation and professional development in early intervention, educational, and transition services. So you get the picture. This is for the entirety of the age span that IDEA covers. Informational webinars, this is what we're doing right now, does not take the place of reading through the entire application package. It's a long package, we understand, but you really just take the time, read through all of the different sections, and you're going to have to go back to it over the time where you're putting together your application. Because it's very detailed, lots of information, lots of process, as I said. These are best practice tips. It is a peer-reviewed competition. So again, I am not scoring the applications. I am not making those initial decisions. If you're receiving new SPDIG money in fiscal year 2023, you cannot apply for fiscal year 2023 grant. If you're in a no-cost extension, say you have a 2017 SPDIG, you're in a no-cost extension, you may apply for a grant. You just can't be receiving new funds into your G5 account and also apply for the SPDIG at the same time. The only eligible applicants are state educational agencies, for example, the Colorado Department of Education. If you are not an SEA, you are not eligible to apply. So, assistance for developing your plan. These are my tips of things I've seen over time and also some great resources for you. So NASD, National Association of State Directors of Special Education, partnered with us to record a series of webinars that provided guidance to potential applicants for the SPDIG program. If you have not had a SPDIG project for a while, or if you've never had one, I highly recommend going through these webinars because the purpose, the rationale behind it was that if an SEA is coming into this and they haven't been part of SIG Network, which is the gathering collaborative arm of the SPDIG, so brings all the grantees together, they learn from outside experts, they learn from each other. If you haven't had those experiences, we're trying to catch you up and help you to understand, have the knowledge, have the skills that others who currently have SPDIGs have. Even if you have had a SPDIG, maybe you need to be reminded of some of this. You have many, I'm sure you wear many, many hats, and this is going to help you put back on that hat of what makes a strong professional development system in your state. What are all the aspects of it? We also have a video from of lessons learned from the SPDIG projects, and that's again me talking, and it was made for new SPDIG projects, but it also would be very applicable for potential SPDIG applicants. We also have a great recording of the Michigan SPDIG sharing their lessons learned. They've had a state improvement grant, now a SPDIG. They had the same project director for many years who was very engaged and involved and was always learning. And so he was able to share the lessons they've learned in their project along with other members of the team. And I recommend that. Beyond recorded videos, we also have some great resources for you. It was very challenging for me to choose just a few from CSEP, which is the State Implementation and Scaling Up of Evidence-Based Practices TA Center, a mouthful. So implementation teams are a critical piece for supporting professional development. And then taking apart the professional development, the training and the coaching and the systems, the coaching system and the training system, taking apart those pieces, the resources that help you build it. And then you can see resources here that help you evaluate it. Part of the implementation teams in your state, from the state level to the regional level, if you have that, to the local level, and then the building level, the communication loops that should occur between those implementation teams, the sharing of data, the sharing of needs, they walk you through that as well. So these are all hyperlinks. They take you to resources, but you can search for even more resources on the Active Implementation Hub that CSEP helps support. Logic model and evaluation. I highly recommend that you start with a logic model. It's not a requirement of this. It's not a requirement in the NIA, but it is a good practice to have a logic model that shows, why do you think you're going to get to these outcomes? So you think in 5 years, your state is going to be different because of your work. Children with disabilities are going to have better outcomes in some way. How do you know you're going to get there? How do the different activities, those inputs, how do they work toward reaching that outcome? And what do you expect the outputs to be in the meantime? And that's going to help you develop your evaluation questions. We have a lot of good resources on building a logic model, building your performance measures, building a plan for your evaluation, and they're all available to you from the Center to Improve Project Performance on OSIP Ideas That Work, and I've got the hyperlink right there. There's also a toolkit for your communication and marketing of your work, because you're not just going to work at the SEA level, you're going to be working with locals, you're going to potentially work with the regional partners, and you need to have communication plans. You also need to be able to externally communicate what you're planning to do, what your outputs are, what your outcomes are, perhaps with your state board of education, perhaps with your state associations, et cetera, et cetera. So thinking through your internal communication plan and your external communication plan, and who will be responsible for that work. It's always implementation science puts a lot of emphasis on one person being responsible for something. Anything you care about, somebody needs to be responsible for it. So a few considerations when you're developing your application. These are questions for you to ask yourself and your team as you're considering what you're going to do with your SPDIG or what you'd like to do with a SPDIG. So alignment is a word we use often. It can be ephemeral, a little ambiguous. What does it look like when the rubber hits the road? And often it's having conversations with others in your SEA, in your lead agency, perhaps in other agencies in your state, but having the conversations about children with disabilities. Again, that whole age range is, the SPDIG covers all of it. So what are the needs in your state? And then what's already happening related to those needs that you could work together with, that you could leverage their efforts, that you could provide coaching together on or training together. There's a data system you can both use. So think about just real concrete, what's already happening that you could be working with, or that you could build off of. There are state climate grants, all kinds of things that are already happening, and having those conversations about what it looks like. Who are the teams who are working on it at the local level as well as the state level? What other supports do they need? What does that mean for this SPDIG? Certainly, we've talked about that a lot in the past with the state systemic improvement plans, the SSIPs. So your required partners, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but your absolute required partners, must-haves for you to receive this grant are at least one university, at least one parent OSEP-funded parent program grantee, either a parent training and information center or a community parent resource center, and at least one local education agency. Those are required. It does not mean that's where you stop. You can bring as many partners in as you want. I do offer the recommendation that you determine what these partners' strengths are and how you're going to be able to build on them. How do they see themselves in the project that you're starting to, develop your vision for? They need to be part of things. Your partners need to be part of the writing of your application, the considerations of your application, if they're really going to see themselves in it, take ownership of that work, help you develop your evaluation measures. So I would really recommend you bringing in your partners right away as you're thinking about this, or your potential partners. It doesn't mean it's all going to work out, but these are also important conversations to be having in the 75 days. So some other possible partners, we have rehabilitative services, early intervention providers, other family organizations, your potential external evaluators, state associations. We have associations for principals, superintendents, teachers, school psychologists, etc. The library system. We have one grantee currently who works with their library system. It is a fantastic project. And other community organizations. Your state. Hopefully you are aware of the kinds of organizations that would help you get the job done. When you're thinking about stakeholder engagement and advisory boards, something I see, it's kind of a non-example. I see some states, some SPDIGs come in and there are no family members on their advisory boards. And it's just critical. And it's not, it shouldn't probably be the person who's already on 3 different boards for your SEA. It should be someone who the work is going to touch. Wherever you are working, the sites you're going to work with, can you find somebody from that? Or is there somebody who you've engaged with in previous work that you think would be appropriate for this? But you want another perspective and not necessarily someone who works with you on a really regular basis at the state. We have a great resource serving on groups that can help support folks who are not used to working on these kinds of teams. That has not been something they've been engaged in the past. So that's a great resource to support both you and the folks you're bringing in to serve with you. So this is you're going to find this in the notice application package, but I'm going to walk you through the absolute priorities and then the competitive preference priority. A competitive preference priority is not required. If you respond to it fully and the reviewers think that you've met that competitive preference priority, you'll receive points for it, but you could come in without responding to that competitive preference priority and you would still be reviewed and scored. You just would not receive those points for the competitive preference priority. So absolute priority 1 was first published in 2012. You can see the reference there. And then absolute priority 2 is directly from IDEA, just a few minor tweaks throughout, but it's section 651 through 655. And that was amended by the ESSA. So again, absolute priorities 1 and 2 are required, but the competitive preference priority is not. And absolute priority 1, in order to meet this priority, an applicant must demonstrate the use of evidence-based, as defined in this notice, professional development practices that will increase implementation of evidence-based practices and result in improved outcomes for children with disabilities. You also must provide ongoing assistance to personnel receiving SPDIG-supported professional development that supports the implementation of evidence-based practices with fidelity, as defined in the notice. Fidelity is. So one way to think about this is you got the program or the innovation or the practice, whatever it is, and the initiative that you want to support, and it has an evidence base. That's a requirement for this SPDIG. It needs to have an evidence base. So you have that. How you support that, how you build your professional development system, how you provide training, how you provide coaching, that also needs to be evidence-based. The SPDIG is big on the idea that if you provide high quality evidence-based supports, personnel are more likely to develop those skills, to develop the knowledge that they need to carry it out, to implement. And ongoing assistance, just a note, we were talking the other day about all the different sayings that we've developed over the years for one-time assistance. So one-time training. There is spray and pray, train and hope, sage on a stage. So that's not what the SPDIG does. The SPDIG provides ongoing assistance. So it's never just a one-time training. It's always this ongoing relationship with the participants in the professional development to continue to build those skills, to continue to improve implementation, and eventually to sustain the use of those practices. We also require that you consider how technology could be used to more efficiently and effectively provide ongoing professional development, including to personnel in rural areas and to other populations, such as personnel in urban or high-need LEAs, as defined in the notice. So this, it's more and more frequent, right? When this was first written, technology wasn't always being used. There is so much synchronous and asynchronous learning going on online, but there are lots of different ways to do it. And so considering, I know there are projects that use Swivel or OWL, and that's something that helps with the coaching that's on there. There's different ways to do what we used to call bug and ear or virtual coaching. So do be considering. There's also, immersion, which we just learned about recently, but there are other, that's one product, but that is about simulating what it's like to be a teacher. And so they get an opportunity to use instructional methods, to use classroom management. So be thinking about all the ways technology could be helping you with your training and coaching and your communications. So this is absolute priority 2. Again, this is straight from IDEA. So you must submit a state personnel development plan that identifies and addresses the state and local needs for the personnel preparation and professional development of personnel, as well as individuals who provide direct supplementary aids and services to children with disabilities. And how we've talked about this is your application serves as your state personnel development plan. It is going to be more of a piece of that plan because you're focusing in on the need that you have data for, that you feel like you can serve really well. you're taking all this, what's happening in your state, into consideration in creating that application, creating that plan. And then this is the competitive preference priority, which we first published last year, and we are using it again this year. And it's about supporting an IDEA Part C comprehensive system of personnel development. And for that, you can receive 3 points or 0 points. There's not 1 or 2 points. So you either fully respond to it per the peer reviewers, or you do not. So the purpose of the priority is to fund projects designed to enable the state to meet the CSPD, which is the Comprehensive System of Personnel Development, requirements of sections 635A, 8, and 9 of the IDEA. And we have a link to it there. In order to be considered for a grant under this priority, if the SEA is not the state lead agency for IDEA Part C, an SEA must establish a partnership consistent with IDEA Section 652B1B with the state lead agency responsible for administering IDEA Part C. So we know there are different setups in states. So if you do not have the lead agency as part of your SEA, then you're going to need to develop that relationship. And within the NIA, you're going to see the different requirements for that relationship, for the budgeting, for the planning. So please do read that really carefully. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sung-Young An, who's going to tell you a bit about the resources available to you in thinking through this priority and how to develop your system.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. My name is Sung-Young An, and I'm a project officer at OSEP. So I'm just going to introduce a few helpful resources for those applicants that are considering partnering with their state Part C systems for the competitive preference points. In the last several years, OSEP funded technical assistance centers in early childhood. They developed many resources to help states build their capacity in building the CSPD. So the first resource you see here was developed by the Early Childhood Personnel Center, ECPC in short. And the link includes practical tools such as self-assessment and examples of CSPD states. And then the second resource is about the system framework that was developed in partnership with ECPC and ECTA, the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. The system framework is a framework for building high quality early intervention and preschool special education programs. And you may want to look at the 6 critical components that the framework talks about and think about how you might align those systems components between K-12 and Part C to develop a cohesive PD plan across age groups. Alignment and cohesion of professional development plan. I know Jennifer mentioned that in the previous slides. And I think if you're applying for the Part C engagement, it's really important to think about how you are, thoughtfully thinking about the alignments and also thinking about the PD plan for Part C in a very meaningful way. And I think these resources will be really helpful. And the last resource is the link to webinar slides that was developed by ECTA. And it talks about how to enhance state early childhood system infrastructure, including Part C and preschool special education. So again, if you're considering applying for competitive preference points, we highly encourage you to review these resources with your Part C partners. And we hope that that helps you develop a strong plan. Thank you. And I'll turn it back to Jennifer now.
Thank you, Sung-Young. There we go. So as I said, there are more definitions in the notice than what I'm going to cover, but I want to just pull out a few of them. These are terms that are sometimes confused or have a little more detail to them. So personnel, this is from the definition 651B of IDEA, means special education teachers, regular education teachers, principals, administrators, related services personnel, paraprofessionals, and early intervention personnel serving infants, toddlers, preschoolers, or children with disabilities, except where a particular category of personnel, such as related services personnel, is identified. So please keep in mind that first purpose we talked about, that the SPDIG is to improve results for children with disabilities. if a child with a disability is in a setting where they're working with general education teachers or regular education teachers here, principals, administrators, we need to support everyone who supports that child, right? So I think that's the idea behind it. But just to let you know that for the purposes of the SPDIG, personnel is a little bit broader than some people realize. The term fidelity, this is a very simple definition of fidelity, means the delivery of instruction and the way in which it was designed to be delivered. So you are doing training and coaching, knowing the core features of your practice so that the personnel can then use the practice as it's intended. And then you're going to be measuring the fidelity of them using that practice, as well as measuring the outcome for children with disabilities as a result of using that practice. So I was talking about logic models earlier. If you want to think of this like a logic model, you are going to be using good professional development practices and creating that great professional development system so that personnel can use new skills. You're going to be measuring the fidelity of those new skills and seeing that it's improving. As a result, outcomes of children with disabilities are going to improve. And that's the story you're talking about with your GPRA measures. That's the story that you're telling of your project. So this is some of the administrative requirements that make a difference for your budget as well. So each year you must budget for a 3-day project directors meeting in Washington, D.C. It is typically in July. Okay, so that's helpful. Budget $4,000 annually to support the SPDIG program website currently administered by the University of Oregon. So that's signetwork.org, which I was speaking about earlier. And then if you have a website, you must use government or industry recognized standards for accessibility. And there is AIM is a project that has really great descriptions of how to do this. I highly recommend it. Contracts and subgrants. So I talked about those base level contracts you must have in place, or subgrants you must have in place. So at least one LEA, at least one IHE, and at least one OSEP funded parent program, either the Parent Training and Information Center in your state or the Community Parent Resource Center if you have one in your state. Again, you could partner with all the LEAs or all the IHEs or all, both PTI and CPRC, and maybe if you have a statewide family engagement center, all of that is fine, but you must have at least those in place every year of your grant, including a no-cost extension year if you have it. So having a plan to get that in place. And then you may award contracts and subgrants to other public and private entities, including the lead agency under Part C of IDEA to carry out the state plan. So these are the requirements for how you budget. And specifically, you must use at least 90% of your funds for a professional development activity described in paragraph A of the notice. So in section A, it's a very long menu to choose from. You should be able to find what you want to do under that menu. If you're having challenges, you can always contact me and I can help you with that. But for example, it talks about implementing positive behavioral interventions and supports. And that is something that past grantees have done. So at least 90% of your funds have to be used for those professional development activities, and you could choose more than one. And then you also need to choose at least one activity from the other activities section described in paragraph B. And you can use up to 10% of your funds for that purpose. If possible, it's nice when they support each other, right? So for example, if a state was working on secondary transition and they are noticing that a lot of the special education personnel and other personnel working in high schools don't have a good knowledge of what these transition activities would be, when to start, how to support those students. So you might want to go and talk with universities who are preparing these individuals and alternate programs, if there are some, and talk about, so what's in your syllabi, what's in your curricula that is preparing people to do this? How can we support you? How can we partner in it? So maybe 10% of your funds is working with those universities in one of those activities to ensure that they're preparing people in a way that helps them to implement evidence-based practices. So GPRA, as I said, every project must collect these data and must share these data. For the SPDIG, we shared in the annual performance report. So typically due in May each year of your project. And these are the 4 measures. So the first one is about your professional development practices. And we have a description of what those professional development practices are. I'm going to share a link with you in a moment so you can get to that document. We have 16 components, evidence-based professional development components, and those components are under the domains of selection, training, coaching, data systems, and administrative support and systems interventions. And so we name those, and each year of your project, you're going to describe what you're doing in those related to those components. And then the second measure is about improving implementation. Now, we know that you're likely going to be measuring systems implementation, but this measure specifically is about measuring the intervention, the practice that is the closest to the child. So if we are using the example of literacy, you're supporting evidence-based literacy. What does it look like when personnel are using those literacy practices? That would be your fidelity measure. And then I'm going to jump over one and we go to the fourth one, then there's that measure of the child outcome. So we're using this literacy intervention. As a result, we expect to see, say, comprehension improve for children with disabilities in these sites. And so then you're going to have an outcome measure that measures that. We have seen some states use statewide assessment measures. Those can be challenging and problematic. As we know, things change. We've seen that in the last few years. So what measure is most proximal, is closest to the intervention? What would you really expect to see changing as a result of what you're supporting personnel to do? And then the third bullet is about using funds to provide activities designed to sustain the use of SPDIG supported practices. So this could be coaching, this could be mentoring, this could be using data to help professional learning communities think through what they're doing in the classroom. It can look a lot of different ways. It can look like working with families. If you're working with early intervention, what are you doing to coach families and support them after they learn some initial practices? So this is about your budgeting beyond an initial training. What are you doing to sustain the use of practices? GPRA resources, as I said, there are materials available to help you prepare for those measures and how you're going to collect those data in your evaluation plan. And you'll want to look at rubric A, which is those professional development components that I just shared. And then again, the fidelity, we do have a resource that can help you develop a fidelity measure, but I highly recommend that you look for an already existing fidelity measure. The RESET, RESET rubrics is one place to go. That has explicit instruction and then has math and literacy. So that's one good place to go. If there's an existing fidelity measure, it is easier than developing a practice profile and working from there. But that is one process you can go through to make your own fidelity measure. So when you're planning on budgeting, we know that some of it is estimates. Some of it, you're not sure exactly what's going to happen, but it's really important that you develop a plan that the reader, the reviewer, feels like they can envision you carrying out. They feel like they understand who you plan to work with, what it's going to look like to do that work, what's going to look like on the ground. Give those details so that they can feel like they're walking through your professional development system, through your project with you. So you're going to be working with your project officer if you're funded, and if you need to make changes later on, you'll work with them to get those approved. But but draw a picture the best you can of your participants and what the day-to-day work will look like in your management plan and how you're going to work as a team together. If you want to come in on a lower level of funding for the first year as you ramp up, that's okay. You do still need to carry out work related to professional development, work related to that section B, the other activities. You still have to have those contracts in place for your PTI, your IHE, and your LDA. So, and you still need to pay SIG network. So you need to have all those things in place, even if you are starting to ramp up a little more slowly and you ask for less money. These are the general requirements. So every peer reviewer is going to look for these and make sure that they are responded to fully. And so the first is about positive efforts to employ and advance in employment qualified individuals with disabilities. And you also must, involve individuals with disabilities or parents of individuals with disabilities ages birth through 26 in planning, implementing, and evaluating the project. So I talked a little bit about this before, but this gives you a little more detail to it. I wanted to share with you some OSEP expectations for engaging families in discretionary grants. So again, building on the previous idea. So for family members to participate fully in the planning, implementing, and evaluating the project, which we just talked about that requirement, you're going to need to build their capacity to do so. So I talked about one resource, but training, technical assistance, and coaching beyond a single resource is important. And we don't just want to build the capacity of families. We want to build the capacity of the people who are engaging families. So that's your project staff. That's the personnel, the early intervention personnel, or the personnel in schools or districts. Both sides need to have capacity to work with each other. If families are coming for a training, if they're coming for an advisory board, providing honoraria, stipends for childcare and travel, supporting active participation, and showing your respect for that active participation. Recruiting family members for positions on projects, and that could be non-traditional recruitment and networking strategies. And then family perspectives in your work, planning how you're going to engage families, building the trust and respectful partnership, using effective engagement strategies that incorporate current research. There is research on how you engage families, right? And how you engage people more generally. Capacity building strategies based on the most current research on adult learning principles. That's important for the SPDIG and how you work with families. A continuum of support, including culturally competent and trauma-informed supports. I know the Pacer Center in Minnesota, one of our parent training and information centers, has done a lot of work on being culturally competent. You can look at the Pacer Center resources. Trauma-informed supports are definitely available. You can look on CIPR, Center to Improve. Oh gosh, Sungering might need to help me. One of those acronyms I'm so used to saying. Center to Improve. Oh gosh, it'll come to me. It's our National Parent Center. And then engaging families requires commitment to carry out intensive ongoing work, building and maintaining partnerships. So this should be your vision of what's going to happen. It's going to take a while. It's going to be challenging work, and it's going to be worth it. And we at OSEP believe that effective family staff partnerships can increase the project's efficiency and effectiveness. So the estimated available funds for this year for this competition is a little shy of $13 million. And we estimate the range of awards to be from $500,000 to about $2.1 million. Please keep in mind that you cannot go below $500,000 for any year unless you're an outlying area. So if you're Puerto Rico, if you're the Virgin Islands, American Samoa, Commonwealth of CNMI, then you may apply for less than $500,000, but it cannot be less than $80,000. CIPR is Center for Parent Information and Resources. So some of our considerations when we determine the amount of funding you'll receive. So you're going to bring in a budget. We'll be reviewing that budget. We're going to be considering the amount of funds available, the population of your state or if you're an outlying area, the types of activities you propose. So does the budget match those? how the proposed activities are aligned with IDEA, how they're aligned with ESEA or ESSA, and are they research and evidence-based? So those are all the considerations. We also do get to consider your previous activity if you've had a SPDIG before. So these are just recommendations now, the format and page limit, 70 pages. I do recommend you really consider them, because consider the reviewer's time, consider how much effort they put into it, and to be respectful of that by following the recommendations. Appendices, there are very specific directions of what to do with the appendices, so please do take a look at that. Appendix A is described in the Dear Applicant letter and in the priority, and that is for tables and things that support your application that you haven't had room to, haven't been able to put there. When possible, I recommend putting it in the narrative because it helps you tell your story. But if there are some other things that didn't fit into the narrative that are part of describing your work, then Appendix A is typically the right place to put them. So this talks about the narrative attachment form, includes the narrative that addresses each of the selection criteria, which will be used to evaluate your application. And so the selection criteria, you can see we have significance, quality of project design, project personnel, resources and management plan, and evaluation. And the largest number of points is for project design and evaluation. So it's all important, but the project design, what's it going to look like? How are you going to carry it out? Again, the reviewer is going to be looking for a really strong plan for that. And the project evaluation, how will you know your professional development is working? How will you know that personnel have been using those skills? How will you know outcomes are improving for children with disabilities? Those are some of the key measures, but you're going to have others, and having a strong evaluation plan is really critical for the SPDIG. So please just do look through all of the different criteria. Sometimes we call these sub-questions, but we want you to have great descriptions of the needs in your state, the gaps or weaknesses, what's happening with services, with infrastructure, with opportunities for children with disabilities in your state, and giving them nature and magnitude of those gaps, and having it be the most recent data whenever possible. The more recent the data, the better in describing your needs. The training and professional development. So we think about the quality, the intensity, the duration. Why is this professional development going to lead to improvements in practices? And then, is it going to result in systems change or improvement? What's going to be different in your state 5 years from now, 10 years from now as a result of your work? Project design. So you do have very clear goals, objectives, and outcomes that are measurable. Are your activities going to address the needs that you've laid out? Sometimes there's not a great alignment of that. Have you described the target population? Who are you going to be serving, and what outcomes do you expect for a specific target population, and why those activities will help to reach those goals? And then collaboration. I talked about how important collaboration is with appropriate partners, because you're going to maximize your effectiveness by doing that and help it to sustain in your state. And then this is still the project design, up-to-date knowledge. Again, so for your needs, up-to-date data. With the project design, have you used the most recent research? Are you supporting your work with research? And then linkages to other agencies and organizations providing services. We talked a little bit about that, about having those conversations, having a knowledge of what they're doing on the ground and how you can work together. Project personnel. So we look for applications that you are encouraging applications for employment from persons who are members of groups that have traditionally been underrepresented based on race, color, national origin, gender, age, or disability. We also look at key personnel qualifications. We look for commitment of each partner. So are they describing how they're going to support you, and does it have a good description of what their work's going to look like? Is your budget adequate to support it? Occasionally I see too small a budget for the family engagement efforts? That is something that the reviewers are absolutely going to be looking for. And then are you going to be able to carry this out on time and within budget? And the reviewers are looking for these clearly defined who's responsible, what are the timelines, what are the milestones for accomplishing these project tasks. This is about the resources and the management plan. So we talked about advisory boards. That's just one way to do it, but how are you going to ensure diversity of perspectives are brought in to the operation? So formative, how are you going to improve the operation by bringing in these other perspectives? And that could be parents, teachers, business community, a variety of disciplinary and professional fields, folks receiving the services, and others. And then continued support. So what does sustainability look like? How are you going to plan for it? And then project evaluation, 25 points, just one thing to think about, which is really a big lot of things, that the methods of evaluation are thorough, feasible, and appropriate for the goals, objectives, and outcomes of the proposed project. And we talked about all those different evaluation resources. Please do take a look at them. They're going to help you put together this evaluation plan. Please do consider having a novice reader review your draft application, have them look for missing details, unclear ideas, undefined terms, and ask them, do you feel like you understand what we're going to do as a result of reading this? Please don't hesitate to contact me. Email is typically the best way to start the conversation, and then we can have a Teams meeting or a call from there. The grants.gov training is there as well. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.